So, from what I hear, we're screwed. We've all become ADHD-riddled brains playing video games while browsing social media, while listening to podcasts on productivity, while hoping for our phone to emit a notification sound that will hopefully cure us from our loneliness. And to be fair, as a form of distraction, games can be really powerful tools, confined realities designed to fix us with that oh-so-sweet dopamine rush. But certainly not always. Some games are boring. And boredom is bad, right? Well, I don't think it always is. I think there's good and bad boredom. I've loved games that could be tedious. Mechanics that I found uncompelling in one title could suddenly spark my interest in another. The absence of stimulation could sometimes be a deafening silence, while other times a moment of blissful mindfulness. As our Lord and Savior Bo Burnham said, boredom is a crime, and in this video we'll seek to explain why certain games committed as a beautiful act of ludo disobedience, while others should be put in jail for wasting our collective time. I'm looking at you, the climbing animation in Twilight Princess. Hey, Link, you gotta move faster, buddy. I have a video to make. In a general sense, games should probably be captivating, distracting, or stimulating. I mean, they are games. They are usually made to be fun. Look at Celeste, a fantastic game where almost no moment is wasted. All the levels are contained, they have consistent save points, and an almost non-existent loading time between each try. It's as lean as it gets. You're either playing or watching one of the rare cinematics. There's no half measures, no moment of monotonous stillness. It's one of the many reasons why it is a contender for best platformer of all time. In other words, Celeste cuts almost everything that doesn't engage its player. If it's not necessary, it's not included. And there's the important word, necessary. Boring moments are often a trade-off. They are an obligatory downtime that builds towards a larger reward. The most ubiquitous and least exciting example of this is tutorials. I worked in game user research and I can tell you that one of the hardest things in the world is to make someone sit still and read a pop-up that explains a mechanic. If there's more than one, people skip it like it's The Witcher Season 4. But we all know it is necessary. It's often boring, but essential. We'll come back to what makes that dynamic really interesting later. Because for now, we need to talk about its opposite and more obvious counterpart, bad boredom. It's a non-engaging moment that doesn't pay off. Look at the infamous Knight of the Round Table summon in Final Fantasy VII. It's a fantastic animation that was ahead of its time. It sells the absolute feeling of power, but it also lasts for over a minute and can't be skipped. It's fantastic the first time you see it, and then it becomes more and more unbearable, to the point where we might ask ourselves if it wasn't a way to nerf the ability. Just throw in the player's time as an added cost that will teach these lazy kids that nothing good comes free in this life. And there are many mechanics like this that just waste players' time. Like in Bloodborne, where you can't fast travel from lamp to lamp, you have to first go back to the Hunter's Dream and then to the location you wanted. Or the absurd amount of time it took to harvest plants in Horizon Forbidden West. They eventually patched it out because yes, 3 seconds is not long, but when you have to do it 500 times in a playthrough, it adds up really fast. But most importantly, it doesn't bring anything to the experience. It's just straight up boring. So bad boredom is a question of wasting the player's time without any payoffs. There is no reasonable justification for it to be this way. It's bad design, and it's not what I'm trying to defend here. What I'm defending is the amazing games that live and breathe because they accepted to implement boring elements to their games so that something greater could exist. So the question becomes, when is boredom good? And I think I have a couple of good examples. Outer Wilds and The Return of the Obra Dinn are two games very dear to my heart. They are beautiful embodiments of the creativity and boldness the indie scene brings to the industry, and they are two great examples of games that have boring moments that needed to exist. Both these games are, in a general sense, puzzle games. They are played very differently and they don't seek to create the same experience, but at their core, you're either a space detective or a boat detective. The two best kinds of detectives, and you are trying to solve a mystery. And to make things compelling, both games use a series of hints that interlink, which makes it almost impossible to go in the wrong direction because every direction is the right direction. At the beginning, everything you find is relevant. You don't necessarily have all the tools to understand what's thrown at you, but each of them will eventually lead to uncovering the bigger secret. Basically, it's like having multiple needles in a haystack. But inevitably, the longer you play, the less needles there are. And slowly but surely, you'll end up with a feeling that's looking more and more like finding a single needle in a haystack. Of course, it's not exactly like that, because hints will drive you towards that missing piece of information. But usually, since these are non-linear games, what stands at the end is the one thing you've had the hardest time to figure out. So you'll end up running around and looking back at things you've already seen just because you're looking for what was missed. And it is, quite frankly, boring. The rhythm of discovery slows down and you're just going through content you've already played through. And these are usually the biggest culprits behind boredom: slow pacing and repetition. And in lesser games, these would be cardinal sins that might have tainted the experience to a point where I would just dislike it. But in Outer Wilds and Oberdin, these moments were inevitable. They can't really be avoided, at least not completely. Outer Wilds still tells you when you've found everything there was to find in a certain place, if you look at your log. And Oberdin has a very concrete amount of things you need to find and a system that lets you know when you get 3 right answers in a row. You are not completely in the blind, and I think it's for the better, but to avoid the issues we've discussed, you need a game that takes you by the hand, and then you would lose what made these games great: a feeling of exploration and discovery. These are one of the few games that made me feel like I was actually solving something, not just going through the motions in a quest written for me with a plot and carefully scripted twists. By letting you fail repeatedly, by letting the needles be needles, Mobius Digital and Lucas Pope accept that their games won't be engaging at every single moment because they know that in the end, the feeling of triumph will be 1,000 times more powerful than if you just went through the motions. In that sense, it's the opposite of a Mario or Doom game where almost every moment is about going forward. There's something magical about uncertainty, like getting lost in Tunic if you missed a clue. Or if you're like me, you might have passed by the door that leads to the depth the first time you played Dark Souls and missed an entire area and also an important item for upgrades. And had to find another way into Blighttown and defeat our favorite duo with a very weak weapon. Sure, the couple of hours I lost going around looking for a path that wouldn't reveal itself wasn't the most exciting moment of my gaming life. But it immersed me in a world that wasn't there to make my playthrough easy. Just like with Outer Wilds and Oberdin, for a mystery to be compelling, for your role as a detective to matter, you must be able to miss something. A prize is only as valuable as the challenge that brought you to it. And sure, being lost isn't exactly the most stimulating experience while you retrace your step for the 10th time. But it is a necessary moment of failure that enables a reward greater than any linear corridor or self-solving mystery ever could hand you. And failure can come in many forms, and another one of them is quite relevant to what we are trying to explore in this video. We've all felt the dread of playing a game that crashes, and then when we load it back up, we find out that an hour or two of progress has been thrown in the garbage can. There's something deeply boring about replaying something you just went through, and yet, for a lot of games, this is part of the gameplay loop. The game over screen has been kinder to players in the last 2 decades, but if we go back to the beginning of gaming, when you ran out of lives, you would just go back to square one. For the whole game, this combined with a high difficulty was a way to inflate the runtime of any given title, and it was also a very profitable system for arcades. Then, this space augmented, consoles found their way into more households, and the general consensus became that you should probably play games and be able to beat them. And so, unforgiving games became scarce, and we now know them as distinct experiences that are usually specific to certain genres. Of course, there's the hegemonic Souls-like, but you also find it in roguelikes and survival games, and the whole new extraction genre that is picking up in popularity. They all have come to integrate a high level of punishment where a lot of progress can disappear at any time. And when it happens, when you lose 50,000 souls at the end of a stupid cliff, or when you get headshot by a sniper that's camping an exit after an hour-long extraction in Tarkov, there's this almost retroactive boredom that hits you. And all you can utter is, all of this for nothing? And what kind of game makes you want to feel that? Well, games that can only exist through tension. An experience that finds meaning in the fear of failure. And you can't fake that one. You have to make the player actually fear the game over screen, or else the rest of the gameplay will feel flat. Boredom is a potent punishment because without it, the thrill couldn't exist. In other words, without the threat of boredom, the game would be boring. It's why you get the release of tension when you kill 80s for the first time, or when you manage to get home with an inventory full of farm in Rust. It wouldn't be as thrilling if you didn't fear the wasted time you put on getting there. Boredom is weaponized to give context to what you are doing. Wasted time becomes a sword of Damocles breathing down your neck. It brings life to mechanics like the course run or permadeath. It's a way to translate an abstract threat directed at the character to a concrete one for you. No matter your level of immersion, nothing really makes you fear a game over screen like the fear of losing your time. And when it happens, sure, frustration can be felt and it will sometimes make you Alt F4 because there's no way I'm doing that again. And yet, we often pick the game right back up the next day, if not 10 minutes later when real life reminds us it's full of wasted time too. We pick it back up because there's nothing like tension to create a memorable experience. Well, maybe there's something else, like a good narrative. And a good story demands good pacing, right? A lot of story-driven games depend on good pacing to fully immerse you. The flow of events, character moments, and reveals keep you engaged right up to the finish line, and the feeling of playing through these is often akin to binge-watching a great TV show. And it's a fantastic way to tell a story. The narrative unveils as question sparks and you go on for the ride. But, once in a while, a game will decide to do away with these tenets and try something that will take you away from that flow. They'll break it to tell a different kind of story. They'll accept the inclusion of something a little bit more boring. They'll juggle with the weight of repetition and withdraw instant narrative satisfaction in the hope of landing a larger message. Two of my favorite games of all time work that way: Nier Automata and The Last of Us Part 2. In Nier, the story is divided in 3 routes, and the first 2 are exactly the same. They're just from the perspective of 2 characters. But since they tag along for basically the whole time, you really are just playing through the same things. The repetition is heavy, but once in a while you get a moment that hits totally differently. Your first playthrough with 2B is classic, interesting but nothing revolutionary, while your second one with 9S sprinkles your playthrough with the enemies' backstories, and eventually yours. And sure, it is boring to go through the same events, the same bosses, the same levels. There's a little bit of variation, but nothing that would warrant a replay. But because it's the same thing, it really cultivates the question of perspective. It's the same event with an added context. And how do you feel now? What does empathy and knowledge change? It doesn't tell you what to feel. You'll just naturally go through these questions just by feeling something different in the second round. And that's a pretty bold move to make. You go through the whole thing again just for that. And if instead it was a couple of cutscenes added at the end of your first playthrough, it wouldn't weigh on you as much. It would feel forced. It wouldn't invite feelings. It would push them. Because as you go through the game, as you did in the first route, it brings you back to a more neutral state. It creates a fertile ground which highlights these new moments, what they bring to the table. And in that sense, it differs a bit from The Last of Us Part 2. In this one, the cut that brings you back to the beginning is more of a cliffhanger. You are at the end of Ellie's journey for revenge, you are exhausted from the lengthy gameplay that brought you there. You felt lost, you've been through despair, rage, dissociation. And as Abby, the villain of your story, raises her gun to your head, it cuts and it brings you back to the beginning of the 3 days you just spent looking for her in Seattle. But you are now her. You are going to see Abby's point of view, but unlike Nier, they only met at the end, so the story runs in parallels and are therefore very different. Also, unlike Nier, The Last of Us resets you mechanically. All the upgrades and materials you carefully accumulated during your playthrough are now gone. Which might be hard to swallow since it is already the least compelling part of the game. Going through tons and tons of drawers and shelves to scavenge garbage isn't really what the game is about. But Naughty Dog had to fill the runtime with gameplay relevant to the setting, so... The Last of Us Part 2 had less repetition than Nier Automata, but the pacing was rough. Even the first half felt long. It's arduous and tedious at some point. It's gritty and unkind. It's not a world that is enjoyable per se. And then, if you disliked Abby for what she'd done, the second half probably started with an overwhelming sense of exasperation. The game didn't smooth the edges. It wanted to be tedious and arduous, because it's what it's about. It's a journey where you share the trauma and the growth of two completely yet similar characters, so that at the end you can't feel anything except sadness for them. Sadness for what they've been through, and for what they continue to do to each other. And if they just wanted to make the most engaging story possible, have the greatest flow and pacing and incite binge watching, they probably wouldn't have gone this way. There's more boredom, less constant excitement than in an Uncharted game, for example. But I'm so glad they went that way. Playing The Last of Us Part 2 often felt like walking in the mud at the end of an exhausting day, every part of your body aching, struggling to find any morsel of energy hidden in your sore muscles. It felt like this because this is what the characters were going through. The harshness of the world didn't warrant an easy catharsis out of their pain. At no point did I share Ellie or Abby's views and goals. I'm too much of a talkative pacifist for that. But at every point I felt their pain, their struggle. That's a powerful experience. And it was only possible because Naughty Dog accepted to let us struggle in the mud with their characters. Because they accepted to delay gratification to empower their story. Both Nier and The Last of Us were examples of boldness, a creative courage that I won't forget for as long as I care for games. I wouldn't fault anyone for disliking them. They were not easy to love, and I understand how much of a hit or miss these types of experiences can be. That is why I feel a profound respect for their creators. They risk a lot creating such a rough piece of art. And in the AAA industry, this kind of integrity is rare. So, when I say that I'm defending boredom, I mean that these games are for me examples of creative courage and they should be celebrated for it. I'm not saying that you should be enjoying them or that if you didn't like them, it's just that you didn't get it. What I'm saying is that there is beauty in the act of creating something that won't be compelling for everybody. I can't fault anybody for disliking these works of art, but I'm asking those who do to return the favor, to look at these games from our point of view, understand the experiences we've had and how elevated they were by the addition of creative choices that go against the usual mentality of game design. I just gave a few examples out of the many more that exist and would have deserved a warm shout out. And in no way is it an exhaustive list of what creates good boredom. But at its core, it's about a thrilling pacing, a distracting gameplay loop, or a constant stream of new content in exchange for meaning, purpose, or depth, when it is necessary to do so. And I think that's something worth defending. And in my case, I hope that this video wasn't too much of a snorefest. Or that if it was for a good reason.